So this is overall view of how the layout is going to look. It's 6 feet by 6 feet board squared up. I got these at Home Depot. So I'm looking over this section here, and I was going to put inserts on the corner on the outside, but it takes up too much space. This is the dining room, and I've only got so much space to work with, and this is about as much as I could squeeze in. And so I want to run as much as 22-inch curves on these corners. So I'm going to put the inserts on the inside instead of on the outside, because the outside would put the layout too close to the curtains and other stuff, and it would push it out further, which is always wonderful to have, except that I just don't have that much space, so I decided to put it on the inside instead of filling in that notch on the outside and putting a little piece on the outside, which would have been a lot easier than what I'm doing right now, but what would it be without complications? So now I'm trying to see which is the best way to put this piece of plywood. I have 2 of these pieces of plywood that were meant for other projects that I didn't end up using, so I have a lot of scrap wood pieces laying around in the closet that I'm going to be using for this to get rid of them, and also they're good pieces, so I figure I'll use them on this layout. Now I'm going to take the yardstick and draw a line from one corner to the other for where I want to make my cut. I had a hard time figuring out where I wanted to stand to make this cut that was most comfortable for me with the saw that I had. I like this saw because it's quieter and it runs on batteries. It's not quiet by far, but it's quieter than my cord one that I plug in the wall, so it cuts down a little bit on the sound. Right here I'm trying to make sure that that thing is level and that I didn't have the bar or the platform tilted on it. And then pretty soon I'm going to get a tape measure, and then I'm going to measure 1.5 inches from the blade itself to the from the blade to the fence there. That way I make the cut right on, because when you're cutting into a corner it's not easy to get right on that corner because you're coming to a point. So the way I worked on this was I measured how far the blade is to that fence that I'm putting up, and then I was able to get it right on. And then I just moved the fence over 1.5 inches so that it's dead on. fence that I put down all in order, and I had to find something to prop the other end of that board up so that I could make my cut nice the way I wanted. And I've learned you have to go slower than I did in this video when cutting it, because you see all the splinters that showed up, and if I would have went a lot slower, which I learned later, I wouldn't have all those splinters popping up, which became a problem. So now I am getting rid of the splinters with the sander. I didn't plan on using a sander for this project, but it was the only thing I could come up with, so I'm smoothing them down with this sander so I don't get them stuck in my hand from handling this thing. This whole project is a takedown, put in the closet, and then whenever needed, be able to put it up quickly, or just put it up. And I have a bad back, so I can't be getting on the floor anymore. On my past videos, you saw my tracks on the floor, and I just can't do that anymore. I can't get up off the floor with a bad back, so this whole thing needs to be assembled standing up. That's my goal, but it's not easy to get it to have support because it's going to have sawhorses under it, but it needs to have brackets to support it too. So that's my dilemma, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to do it. It could all fall apart, who knows, but we won't know till we try it out. So here I'm getting all those splinters out and smoothing them down. This is 80 grit paper. There's no specific paper you need, it's just what I happen to have on the sander at the time. I'm trying to figure out, now that I've got this corner in here, I'm lining this up to see how it's going to look, but the problem is that sheet for the corner insert's about 1/8 of an inch or so, so it's not as high as these pine boards on the outside, so I need to raise it up to that level. And it would be nice to use another insert that's the same size. You can kind of see here, I'm looking at it to see that's how it raises it up level, and it looks good there, but I don't have enough material to put a full one down like that, plus it makes it more heavy. So I'm going to have to cut strips and place them on this insert in an L shape so that I have something to screw down to and to attach it with. So in this part here, I'm going to cut the strips, and there's no measurement on these strips. They're just a few inches wide. They're not going to be seen by anyone. They are just for getting something to attach screws to, so that I can attach that insert to these other pine boards to make my corner. So instead of using another full sheet for another insert to bring it level up to the rest of the boards, which would be nice to do, but it's just extra cost and extra material, and I have these laying around, so I decided to double up the thickness so it would be the level, and then rip these pieces, and I kept having to readjust this fence all the time just to do that, and but I got it done. Now I'm rough fitting this in once I cut these strips to see how they're going to look and how they're going to fit when I get them into this corner, and see how they level up to the rest of those boards, so that I can have a nice flush attachment. This has become more complicated than I originally intended. It was supposed to be a really simple little project, but now it's become a little more complicated trying to make it so that it works. I haven't attached anything, so I have to think about how's it going to fall, if it falls down, or how's it going to stay up level, which is the strong points, which is the weak points. So this is rather than a full sheet in there, just strips. So what I'm doing here is getting the corners squared up, and I am going to glue down an insert, or a back piece I should say, onto the corner pieces, and that will give me a little meat to use my router to put an insert in there. And then once I do that, then I can have something to attach both the boards together, and I'm going to do it on the boards too, which you'll see later on, and then also on these corner pieces as I mentioned. And then I use glue on the back of them to fasten them down on these corners, and then I put some staples with an air gun to hold that and make it secure, so it's a strong backing on there. And the glue that I am using is Gorilla Glue. The package says original Gorilla Glue bonds virtually everything: wood, stone, metal, ceramic, foam, glass, and more. It's a really strong glue, so I decided to try it out for the first time. Plus I can use it for other applications. You may recognize some of these pieces from what I had cut earlier with my skill saw, and so that's what those pieces are. I'm not making them so that they're an exact measurement on width or an exact length. I just need about a foot or so of it so that I can make sure my router doesn't miss when I go through it on the top. And some might be wondering, why would you put your inserts on the top where the track's gonna go and not on the bottom like most people do? And it's because I have a bad back and it hurts to bend and squat a lot, and so if I can get everything attached on the top of this layout and screw everything down standing up, it helps me out physically. So that's why I do it. I've got really bad arthritis and I've had back surgery done and 2 back injuries. So having to bend down and get underneath this just to attach pieces together is not an option for me to do. But if you want to, you can certainly do it that way, and I'm pretty sure everybody mostly does want to do it that way, but I need to access everything from the top. And what I'm measuring here is I ended out with 2 different leaks with this plywood. It wasn't exactly like 2 foot by 2 foot. I think it was labeled as in the store, but it was more like 2 foot by 3 foot. So one length ended out a little longer than the other, or maybe that's because I cut it at an angle. So I'm trying to kind of make it as even as possible on the corners, the width and everything. Even if it doesn't end out that way, it's not a deal breaker. All it has to do is hold up the track. So that's the purpose of them in the first place. Some of you probably may not want to use staples to secure this because they will go through the wood. I'm using close to a 2-inch staple. I think it's maybe 1 5/8 or something, so it does go through the wood, and that is a disadvantage. I should have had a little more patience just to clamp down the glued pieces and just let them dry overnight, but didn't have a lot of patience and just wanted to get this done on this particular afternoon. But most people who do want to do it, probably the better way will only glue it and then clamp it and not add the staples like I did. So here in this next clip you can see how I have these insert pads, I guess you could call them, on both sides of this plywood, and I have to pull it away from this tabletop to keep those staples from going through and nailing themselves to the board. And here is the side effects of using the staples. I now have to take out my Dremel tool and I have to use a cutoff wheel that usually comes with all the Dremel kits to cut off the staple ends that came through the side where the track's going to lay on top. So that's why I say you may want to go without using the staples unless you're like me and just want to get things done. Then you'll have to cut them off with this, and so that's what I'm preparing to do here. one thing that you will want to do when you cut these staple ends off that go through the wood is don't cut them all the way through if you can help it, but cut them most of the way through, and then take a pair of pliers and just peel them off and shave them down with the top of that grinding wheel so that they're flush with the wood. Because if you go and you cut it all the way through, they fly off and then they could hit you in the eye and injure you, or they could fly off and go in your carpet and you could end up stepping on little bits of metal. So what I did to avoid that is I did not cut them all the way through. I cut them almost all the way through, and then all I had to do is take a pair of snips and then just peel them off and put them in a little tray and then throw them in the trash can so you don't find them in your foot or in out with your eye. And when I was doing this, I wore safety glasses the whole time, which you can't see in the footage. Well, maybe right there you might be able to see it just a little bit at the top of your screen, but I made sure to wear those when doing this in case any bits of metal flew off and hit me in the face. So far I didn't have that, but I was prepared for it, so that's something else you'll want to do if you choose this route. I don't think most people will. They'll just want to glue it and clamp it and let it dry overnight, which is probably the better choice anyway. Well, this is the dilemma. Do I go with this strip to hold them together? It's already pre-done, and these that sink in, and that's just the goal. Or should I go wider? Would that make more sense? Would it hold it together, the two sections, better? There's a lot of deciding going on. So this is a picture of the hardware that's going on to join the corners. We have flathead Phillips number 10s, 32 thread, and we have T-nuts to match those, and that will be embedded in the wood, and then I can just screw it down into the T-nuts, and those will also be glued into place, the T-nuts, because I've had those pop out before. T-nuts. So this is a router jig that I made. What I'm doing here is lining up these insert pieces so that I know where I want to go with the router. So where to start the cut and then where to end the cut based on the length and width of this piece right here. And then I'm using a spade bit. It's a 1/2 inch, and I'm drilling 2 of these starter holes that I can set the router bit into, and then from there I can guide it forward to make my cut. This is a shallow cut. It's only as deep as those inserts thereabout, or a tad bit deeper, and I measured it with the insert against the bit, and the bit is a straight bit, router bit, 1/2 inch. And this is a jig that I made to help guide my router. I made it a long time ago. It's a little bit of a clumsy jig. It's too long. It's about 3 or 4 feet long. It's too long for this project. I didn't know how long I wanted to make it when I built it, but I used it to help guide my router for this part. And you have to clamp it down to keep it in place. Repositioned for a second cut pass. I needed 1 inch wide, and I don't have a bit that's over a 1/2 inch. So I'm doing a second pass alongside the first one on this cut. You can see I had a hard time with this jig. It's not a very pretty cut, but it is functional, and so I'm going to take it for what it is. But also those boards can spread if they're not clamped down tight enough. So now I will be putting the insert in, and then I'm going to use some temporary screws that came with the packaging. Those won't be the permanent ones, but I'm just trying to get everything to fit together and not separate from each other, all these boards, while I'm working on it. I only have so many clamps to keep stuff together. So I'm drilling some pilot holes in here, and I'll put some get-by screws in just to hold it into place. And then you will see why I'm putting this next insert in, because off in the corner there you can see it flipped up and not flush with the rest of the boards and leaning in. And so I'm going to fix that after I get done on this corner. So I'm adding this to avoid that happening on the rest of the corners, so that it doesn't flip up in that one area like you see in the background of this video. And so then we're going to end out with 4 of these inserts to keep all the boards together, plus the corners for the curved track that's coming in. In addition, I also take the sawhorses and I angle them at an angle so that it holds up everything in these corners. I don't just have it horizontal straight across. You can kind of see it at an angle there, and that's important in order to support everything. And also you can see where those pads are that I had ripped some boards for with leftover plywood underneath. It's also used for cutting in with the router, because these sheets are not very thick. It would have been nicer to have had thicker ones, plywood that is even with these pine boards. These are pine shelving boards, so that it's flush straight across. But I have to cut into them, and so since they're so shallow, I needed the little meat that you saw earlier in the video underneath the plywood. And now I'm going to cut into them. And you see me reaching across there. That wood wasn't secure on that corner. It started to move as I was cutting into it with the router. So you'll want to find a way to secure that, which is not easy since it's at an angle, and keep that from happening. So now these two sections will be joined together by this insert here in the corner that will keep it from popping up like it did on the other side. So now we are adding T-nuts into these holes here. You've got to drill them big enough to get it down in there. And I've had experiences with them pulling out of the wood in the past, so that's why I'm going to add Gorilla Glue to this. And the Gorilla Glue adheres to both metal and wood. I did learn a few things about this glue, that you have to let it dry and adhere to these T-nuts before working with it, or it becomes a mess. Where I had just 3 of them on there. The purpose of the T-nut, along with machine screws, is for long-term use, because over time those holes with wood screws will get worn out and they'll stop holding the pieces of wood together. So for longer time use of continuing to set up and drill and undrill the pieces together, I'm putting these T-nuts in with machine screws. And you'll notice that I have some arrows across the seams, and it's extremely helpful for lining up these corners to which insert they go to, because I don't have these measured out on the inserts. So to try and say, oh, they're all 12 inches, I'll just line it up every 12, won't work because I never measured it. So I line it up with those color-coded arrows. Each corner has a different color so that I can match the corner with the boards that it goes to. So here's the finished product. It fills the entire dining room, as you could see, and then there's the markings to line up those corners, and everything is held down from the top so I don't have to get underneath. And then these sawhorses, I put them at an angle, not straight across, so that they can hold up both the corner plus the two boards.